I've always been a pretty obsessive person, I guess you could say. So when I discovered gaming in my earlier teenage years, I got hooked pretty fast. And basically, what this video is going to be about is how gaming helped me avoid with insecurities, anxiety, and personal fears I had outside of gaming in just my personal life in general. Right? I'm sure everyone you know, when they're going through adolescence and their body, their mind is changing, they have all these kind of you know, insecurities about how they sound, or about their skin, or about their height, or about this and that thing, because it's such an interesting developing time in someone's life. But I've always been very self-aware about my appearance, how I sound, how I present myself, what other people think of me, stuff like that. So if you combine that with kind of how much of an introvert I am, I'm not really a people person, I'm more of a thing person, I like to find. When you combine those two things, and interest in things, and extreme self-awareness, I want to not be like judged for my appearance, my voice, stuff like that, then you find someone who's like me, is very much likely to be drawn towards video games as a hobby. And over time, video games basically became more and more of a hobby for me. And then I basically got hooked within, I'd say, half a year to 6 months of within discovering video games and getting my first console, all that different stuff. Plus, it was quarantine, so I had nothing else to do besides online school. So gaming basically became my life from that point forward. And then things started opening up again. Quarantine started kind of residing. Maybe it jumped back up again with the COVID cases, so we had to stay inside again, and we couldn't really do anything. But I basically just got used to the life where I was just this guy who stayed inside all the time and played video games. I didn't really have any real life friends besides the ones I talked to over texting and whatnot. So because of that, I basically became an extreme social recluse. I started getting like super obsessive over very small things, like obviously my progress in video games, but also my grades. I became pretty antisocial in general, I guess is a good way that you could summarize it. I just wasn't really interested in social interaction, like at all. Like I would go to school, I wouldn't really talk to anyone. I might like say something funny because I was like sitting at the back of the class with like one or two guys who I thought were my friends at the time, even though we like barely talked to each other and just kind of like roasted each other, so that we could make ourselves look funny and that we could make ourselves look good. But that was basically my life, and I just wasn't interested in talking to anyone or learning anything about them, because I just thought, I had this weird subconscious belief, I guess, that everything that wasn't concerning my video game career was basically just illusion. It was basically just not important at all. It was something that I could just brush off and not care about at all, regardless of how I felt about things. So that was a very dark and very unhealthy period in my life, and I tried getting help for it. I tried getting therapy with these different centers from about the same town that I live in, and basically I kept getting the same basic advice over and over again. I'm also a perfectionist, so this one guy would just tell me to accept living with failure and be patient with other people around you, because that was another thing. I got extremely impatient with other people because basically gaming had drawn me in so much that I only had the patience for gaming. And if you've played any video games in your life, obviously you know they're very hyper stimulating. They're very fast paced. You don't really have to have patience for them, except on the loading screens. So I started holding those standards of like everything should be quick and automatic and easy to understand to other people around me, right? So I started expecting people to act entirely logical, to never insult me, to always explain their motivation for things, to always, basically just express their motivation for I don't know, maybe someone insulted me, or maybe someone just looked at me funny, or said something about my hair or about my voice or about how my face looked, and I would get super insecure about that, and then I would try and confront them about why they said that, and they wouldn't give me a straight answer, because that's just like the level of maturity that we're all at when we're in, I don't know, the 8th grade, the 9th grade, 7th grade, stuff like that. It's like at that age, you're really not, most people, especially not me, we weren't prepared to have like deep conversations and just like be real with each other about certain things. That's something that comes with maturity, and because we couldn't do that, I found that very frustrating. I found the whole idea of having a social life, of taking a genuine interest in people around you, to be kind of silly, just because I thought all these different people in my class are being so terrible to me. Why would I even bother to take an interest in them, to try and become friends with them? It just didn't make sense to me. I couldn't work out that equation, right? Like, I was just thinking about people in such systematic terms that the overarching pattern here is that gaming became my escape from reality and all of its different imperfections, all of its different quirks as a whole. It basically just became my new reality. It helped me escape, and that's what this video is about. So I'll dive into that a little bit more. So I also started getting like really bad at anxiety around this time. Obviously, I was very insecure about how I presented myself, but I also started thinking, especially as I got into high school, right? I started 9th grade as like an absolute gamer. No friends, not really any responsibilities either. I wasn't really doing extracurriculars. I didn't have like an after-school job or anything like that. So I was basically just like a NEET, or I guess I was like a net, right? Not in education, not in employment or training, because I was in education, mostly because I had to, but other than that, I was kind of a loser. So yeah, my source of anxiety was just the fact that people were going to abandon me, right? And they already did, right? And if you know how the high school system works, it's that basically you go from your elementary school, at least that's how this works in Canada, but you go from your elementary school, which is like grades kindergarten through 8, right? So I graduated that year, and then I hopped over to high school, which is grades 9 to 12, but high school is also a lot larger school. There's a lot more people who go to it. It's basically like all these different feeder schools within the area who go to this one school. So I'd had some bad experiences with people from my older school, right, the elementary one. Arguments, they insult me, I insult them, just shit happens on like the playground and stuff, and I just couldn't find it in myself to forgive them. So I was basically just friendless for pretty much the entirety of my 9th grade at school, just because video games had consumed me for that entire period, and I never bothered to reflect on it. I never bothered of thinking of just letting go from video games in favor of fixing myself, because I thought at this point that video games were basically just like the highest pleasure life could afford me. I thought that there was nothing outside of this that could bring me any sort of purpose, any sort of fulfillment, any other reason to get out of bed in the morning. And that's what I ultimately feared, was not having a purpose in life, right? I was more willing to give up having friends than getting out of bed in the morning, knowing that I was being inauthentic to myself and having basically nothing to do, right? Because video games at this point were the only thing I really found meaning in. By the way, if you're still hooked on video games and you're interested in finding a way out of your addiction, much like I did, then I now have a course up. The link is in the description, and you can purchase it right now to get the best deal on it that there will ever be. And I can guarantee that this course will help you quit video games within, I'd say, 2 weeks, quite confidently, because I've put days, hours, weeks worth of effort into this course, writing down everything I know and translating it into video for your benefit. So go ahead and check that out if that's something you'd be interested in. So I've always kind of been a sucker for like fiction, movies, fantasy, stuff like that. All of this different stuff that like isn't really real, but it's kind of put into like a story format, and it kind of becomes real in your own head as you consume it, right? And this connects to video games, because obviously fiction is kind of it is an escape from reality, but I don't think reading like fantasy books or like fiction novels is always necessarily a bad habit, but that's topic for a totally different video. But this obviously relates to video games because a lot of video games are just like fantasy games, right? You become a totally different person when you log into the game. In this world, maybe I'm like a nerdy student who overthinks everything, who overanalyzes everything, who doesn't bother to talk to people, who maybe my parents are concerned about me because I'm not getting good grades. But when I log into that imaginary world, right? Like I always played like Zelda, Breath of the Wild, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, all that stuff. So when I logged into those games, I was like this dragon slayer, this warrior, this guy who had a sense of purpose and mission, and who would die if he didn't fulfill that, right? It brought me on this journey. It told me a story, and I was the main actor in it, right? That's a main reason why gaming was so, what's the word? It's that's why it drew me in, right? Because it basically told me a story about myself that I grew to believe that I was the main character. I was him, as they say. But yeah, that paired with the hyper-stimulation of more modern video games just really kind of drew me in. And I couldn't really say no to this new medium of video games because it was everything that I had loved about like fiction and distraction and like fantasy books and all that stuff, like the Lord of the Rings, and then you like turn it into a video game, and then you like make yourself the main character, and then you can choose your own path, and it's like super interactive. You're doing all this cool shit in the video game and everything like that. Like what 12-year-old in with my kind of temperament, who's kind of like me with my personality traits, right? Like purpose oriented, more like thing oriented, stuff like that. Interested in stories. What 12-year-old can't say no to that, right? I think that's something we often overlook in the modern world. It's like how are people supposed to say no to these like extreme pleasures that the modern world is offering them, right? Like drugs, video games are just one, or like junk food, porn, all these different things. This is kind of a side point, and it's kind of outside the scope of my channel. But how are you supposed to say no to these things? And especially with video games, it's actually, what I found is that it's a very intense struggle just to use your willpower to say no to these things, right? You're really going against the grain, and you're totally beating the odds and being super proactive if you're even just like thinking about quitting these things, right? Because that's the first step to actually overcoming these things, is just thinking about it, and maybe just like trying like little incremental steps here and there, just playing like 5 minutes less today and then 5 minutes less the next day. That's again like beating incredible odds in the modern world, just because all this stuff has been tailored to suit or to appeal to our instincts that we've been given as humans. They're supposed to like tap into the structure of our brain and kind of like hook us like a drug. So yeah, that's why quitting was so hard for me. And yeah, ultimately I learned to face my fears head on when I started to quit video games. So once I'm actually taking the courage to quit video games, I'm sort of had a lot of seasons of self-reflection, especially I think after I turned like 15, and then I kind of had I don't know, not a quarter life crisis, but kind of just like a crisis of identity, because I realized that I was still I was probably like a young man, you know, like my voice was getting lower, my body was changing. I was probably like physically a man at this point, but I was still playing video games that like kids half my age were playing, right? You know, you log on to Fortnite as like a 20-year-old, and there's like all these different like kids on the voice chat. This is just something you're doing to unwind, and then you find it like super incredibly annoying that there's all these different kids who are just like saying slurs and like dunking on it and like just insulting each other in the voice chat, right? that's another thing I found kind of embarrassing about playing video games, is that they're literal like kids playing this. They're like kids who are half my age, who are playing the same game, who are playing the same games as I am, and like talking about them freely. So that just kind of got on my nerves personally, which was one of my motivations for quitting, right? I just don't want to be like these little kids. I want to start acting like an adult. I want to start taking some responsibility for myself. But I also looked deeper within myself, and I saw that I was just, like I described before, using these video games to hide myself from my shitty reality, to hide my insecurities, to hide my shortcomings as a human being, instead of facing them head on and actually trying to actively improve them, right? Instead of actually taking responsibility for myself. So, yeah, that was my motivation for quitting, to reconnect myself to the real world, to kind of escape from this escape that I was using to shield myself from reality, to actually make an impact on the real world, right? Because I've always had like a big degree of self-confidence. I don't know if you can relate to this, but I've always thought that like I can pretty much do anything I set my mind to. Like this is an interesting story because when I first started playing video games, probably within the first 2 years of starting my little gaming addiction, as I like to call it now, I probably purchased 3, 4, 5 different consoles. I started like collecting retro stuff, so I bought like Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, Game Boy, all this different stuff. I basically just like accumulated like this very nice little collection of like physical games, digital games, within just like a couple of years, because I wanted to, right? I set my mind to collecting all this merchandise and convincing my parents to drive me out to these different people on eBay and Facebook Marketplace who were selling these things. I picked all this stuff up, and it was like a massive pain in the butt sometimes. It was basically like my own little adventure that I undertook while playing video games, to basically just like collect these different games that I wanted to play, right? And I ended up with like $600-$700 in like gaming equipment and merchandise, memorabilia, what have you, which I eventually sold all of that. But just like, I like to think about how impressive it is that I just went out of my way and did that, right? Whereas some other people might be satisfied with just playing Fortnite, playing Minecraft, just like these really like normie games, what have you. I actually, this sounds very arrogant, and it probably is, but I actually went out of my way and just like bought all this different stuff just because I set my mind to it, right? So that kind of served as like proof that I could do anything that I really set my mind to. So I figured, if I can make a huge impact on the video games that I play, if I can 100% this thing and that thing, and do like this really challenging task and get to like this level in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate Online, then why not try and make that same amount of change, put that much effort and that much focus into making change that's beneficial for myself in the real world. So I started weightlifting, as you probably know. If you've ever watched this channel before, I lift quite religiously now. Started meditating, working on my mental health, gratitude journaling, studying different schools of philosophy, just kind of as like a hobby. But I had to like rapidly scale down my dopamine and my cravings to do video games up until this point, right? So the person who I am now took quite a lot of work, but I still have the same drive and the same motivation as when I was like a 12-year-old kid with a very short attention span and no friends, over quarantine, and having absolutely nothing to do. So yeah, that's basically how I escape video games and learn to live in the real world as it is. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the comments. I'll be sure to answer them. Yeah, like this video, subscribe if you appreciated what you saw here, and I'll see you next time.